I made the decision to step away from my job. I had been a classroom teacher for 14 years and thought I would take a break. And that would be the magic bullet finally, eliminate stress, and all of my problems would be solved, right? So each time I just thought like, this is going to do it. This is going to do it. And it wasn't until after I left my career in teaching that I found myself in this very deep, dark place I never expected to find myself in. I had done everything I knew to heal. And here I was very low and also still in pain and still sick. And so everything from there just became like clawing myself out of that place so that I would never go back there. And I could hopefully end some cycles for my own family, for my daughter, and hopefully not create any new, deeper ones. And so as I worked on my mental, emotional health, I started to feel physical pain in my body leave as well.
The Onward podcast features authentic conversations on facing adversity and moving forward. And my guests also discuss how they found themselves along the way. My name is Emily Harmon, and I'm your host. My guest today is Debbie Emick. Debbie is co-creator and blogger at gobucketyourself.com, and she's co-host of the One Life Live It podcast. Debbie is a survivor of multiple chronic illnesses, autoimmune diseases. And in this episode, we talk about the long road that she took to learn that her path to healing was through accessing the mind-body connection to disease and health. And through addressing and releasing repressed emotions and past traumas, Debbie was able to experience a life of greater health, ease, and fulfillment by living out her authentic purpose. So many people live with invisible illnesses, and it's very tough to get a diagnosis. And sometimes it takes years. I've been through this with my daughter, and I could definitely relate to what Debbie was saying, at least from the experience of a mother witnessing her own daughter going through it. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing your story.
Debbie, welcome to the Onward podcast.
Hi, Emily. I'm so grateful to be here. It is my pleasure to have this great conversation with you today. Thank you for having me.
It's always nice to have another podcast host on my podcast.
Yeah, it's a little weird to be on this side of the microphone. It's good to be able to understand what it's like to talk about myself a lot without a lot from the other side. So yeah, this is a little different, but it's going well. So
yeah. So tell us about your podcast, One Life Live It. I love that name.
Thank you. That is a creation my husband and I have put together since he stepped away from his W-2 job. He had this dream project called Go Bucket Yourself. And everything we make at Go Bucket Yourself is to empower people to begin taking steps to live the life they want today and not wait for someday. And so the One Life Live It podcast is an extension of that. We talk about certain things that have helped us get where we are, ideas with parenting and marriage and family and finances and mental health, spiritual health. But we also interview a lot of people that are living outside the box, outside the norms of what society may deem the American dream, and just trying to show what that's like and what it's like to build the life you truly want and not maybe the one that you've been told you should want or should have.
I love that because I feel like I worked the job that I felt I should be working until I was 56, until I could retire. And part of it's probably just because the way I was brought up, my parents were like, you work hard and you do a good job and you work until you get your retirement. And at some point, I felt like I had worked far enough that I may as well just stay until I get my retirement. But I ended up leaving the exact month that I could retire. And then everyone was telling me what I should do. Mm-hmm. And I decided, no, I'm going to do what I want to do, which was starting a podcast and being a coach and helping people create a life that they love. And so I think why is it, do you think, is it this next generation? I don't think it's as much my generation, but of people who are deciding life's too short to work this hard for this long.
Well, there's a lot of reasons clearly, but your story's beautiful. And I love yours because I think it's so important to hear that it's never too late. You're creating the life you want now, and you're helping other people do the same. For my husband and I started navigating these like long winding roads, autoimmune disease, discovery and diagnosis. And through that process, my own mortality was really made very clear to me. Not that that's any different from any other human being on the planet, right? None of us have anything guaranteed, but I was having it put in front of my face in a very clear way. And that made me question whether my actions were lining up with my values. And I began to realize that I didn't need more money. Like, I don't live in some mansion on the hill or anything like that. I don't drive super fancy cars, but what I valued were not like those types of possessions. I learned that I valued time more. And so once I made that realization, it was like all the steps that we took from there on out were to buy more time and not earn more money necessarily. Not that, like we call those golden handcuffs that you were talking about, staying in until you could retire for a reason. We found a way to create some passive income so that we could step away from our jobs. And then that was a very important part in my own healing as well, just having the time and energy and space to do that. But it's also allowed me to be home with my daughters in a way that I wasn't before. Yeah. And so I couldn't answer for everyone, but I do think purpose is becoming such a bigger question in people's lives rather than this culture I was raised in. It sounds like you were raised in, which is like hustle, grind, put your head down, get the work done, don't complain. Someday you'll get retirement, a good pension, and then you can do the things you want to do. Right. And so, we're just learning there doesn't have to be a choice. You can't get all the way to the end in one day, right? But you can make small steps each day to get where you want to be along the way.
Yeah. And I too made a few sacrifices. Like I was living in Washington, D.C., right by the National Stadium in my last job, but I couldn't afford to retire and live there. And I didn't necessarily need a huge house. So I bought a nice 2-bedroom condo with an office. I love it. It's just enough space for me and my kids when they visit. So there might be some things that you think, do I have to have this house? Do I have to keep this? Do I have to drive this car? Or could I drive a different car? All a car does is get you from point A to point B. So I think sometimes we think, no, there's no way I could do that. But take some time to think, well, how could I make this happen? And what happened when I retired? Within 3 weeks after I retired, my kid's dad got sick with cancer and then he died 5 months later. That showed me the life is short. That was a gift.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't have to be sad as long as we're able to live our days the way that we want to, the way we're meant to by our own unique purpose. It is sad when we're toiling away and unhappy and our life has come to an end too soon in that way. That's something I've learned from my illness too. But I think you touched on such an important point. And I think the younger generations know this in a way the older generations might not. And that is that less so many times is more, right? So often we think if I just get this, then I'll be happy. If I get this, then I'll be happy. And we find we have so much to maintain that we don't have any time. We're just creating more work for ourselves. And external things don't ever really make us happy, right? And so it takes a long time to learn that. But sometimes just having less to take care of, to worry about, to finance, all of that equals so much more time, energy, just happiness, joy, because you don't have to maintain all of that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned you had some illnesses that contributed to that decision. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So, like I said, about 10 years ago, after the birth of my youngest daughter, I started having some symptoms that I couldn't ignore anymore. So, for instance, one weekend I mowed the lawn and I couldn't push a shopping cart the next day because of the pain in my hands and wrists and elbows and shoulders. We like to hike in Colorado, and I just had an excruciating hike one summer where I was creeping down the mountain. And I had little whispers before that something might be up, but I ignored them until it was like really impeding with my life and my livelihood, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. So I finally went to the doctor and started this long path of figuring out what was going on, which is so common with autoimmune diseases, with chronic illnesses, and really giving away all of my power to someone with MD after their name, right? Or a specialty.
Yeah.
Until one point, I was taking like 9 different prescription medications 3 times a day and feeling worse than when I started seeking help. And so my story is really about taking back my own power and control of my own health, like one little bit at a time, to find my own health and healing. So for a while, that looked like working on the food I put into my mouth, and then movement and exercise, and then decreasing like toxicities in my environment and the products I used, until finally I had this conversation with my rheumatologist, and she said, "It's too bad you have to work." And I really started questioning that, right? And so I made the decision to step away from my job. I had been a classroom teacher for 14 years and thought I would take a break. And that would be the magic bullet finally, eliminate stress, and all of my problems would be solved, right? So each time I just thought like, this is going to do it. This is going to do it. And it wasn't until after I left my career in teaching that I found myself in this very deep, dark place I never expected to find myself in. I had done everything I knew to heal. And here I was, very low and also still in pain and still sick. And so everything from there just became like clawing myself out of that place so that I would never go back there. And I could hopefully end some cycles for my own family, for my daughter, and hopefully not create any new, deeper ones. So as I worked on my mental, emotional health, I started to feel physical pain in my body leave as well. And then it was just really impossible to deny this connection between our emotional health and our physical health. So it just kept me going from there, doing that kind of deeper work.
So are you out of pain now?
Yeah, most days I'm very pain-free. There are definitely things that can trigger some reactions in my body because of some like repressed emotions and some trauma from my childhood that I had never really dealt with. This emotional work took sort of releasing that, finally dealing with it, addressing it. I also was able to learn that I had use perfectionism and people pleasing as a way to cope, as a way to get through, and also keep people at arm's length, right? Never be vulnerable enough to let them really see me, never even let myself see the real me. So when I began trying to heal, everything just became another way to dial that perfectionism, that people pleasing up a notch. So like with food, it was almost to like an over controlling extent, not in a nourishing, loving way, right? Same thing with exercise. It was almost like punishing myself. And so until I could recognize that misinformed coping mechanism, those patterns and routines in my behavior, I couldn't really use those other things in a healthy way. And so once I was able to strip those back, I'm now able to put all of that stuff together in a loving way, right? So I eat to love and nourish my body. I move in a loving, caring way for my body. Same thing. So it all works together.
Did you figure that out on your own, or did you go and get counseling to help with the food and the exercise and noticing those patterns?
Yeah, a lot of traditional medical doctors would not tell me that that would make much of a difference, like working on the more holistic practices. And so at first I asked a lot of questions about that to my specialists and got a lot of like, oh, don't buy the snake oil type answers. So I kind of had to work on those things on my own and figure them out and learn to not really talk to my doctor. I have a great team of doctors. I still really appreciate them. I have a couple of prescription meds that help like make my immune system function hopefully properly. But I also do these other things that, yeah, a lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was just reading and learning. And eventually I wanted a probiotic. And so I got really confused by all of that. I was just learning about like gut health, leaky gut, and the relationship that has with your overall health. And so I went to this chiropractor searching for a probiotic. And that's just what I said. I just want a probiotic. Can you recommend a probiotic? And she kind of saw through that And she didn't let me off with that. She wanted to do some energetic and some like somatic healing type work. And I was very pragmatic at that point. And if I couldn't see it, I didn't really believe it. And so I went out looking for skeptics. I went to my husband and I was like, can you believe she wants to do this? And to a good friend. And they were both like, yeah, if you've tried everything else, like, why not just give it a try? And so that was the first glimpse I had of like, I had been going at like 7 years at trying to get better.
I know what it's like. I mean, not from me, but from taking my daughter to Children's Hospital all the time. And you go from one doctor to another and to another and to another. And because she had different illnesses and you can't look at her and tell, and then sometimes the doctors would act like they could cure it, but they really couldn't. And so you get just frustrated with the doctors. You don't even want to go back and see them sometimes, because it's like, it's hard. It's got to be hard. And then sometimes I'm sure you felt like they thought that you were crazy. You're just making it up.
Yeah, that is a common story for sure. And I did get asked like mental health questions per se, but not the kind of like, hey, would you like to see a psychologist or something? So yeah, I think it's really common in that way, especially for women, to be dismissed when it's something that can't be measured or can't be observed, right?
Right.
And for me, a lot of what would happen is one test would show something off and it would lead to another and it would lead to another, which isn't always super common in chronic illness and autoimmune disease. And that I think women find themselves trying to convince their doctors or explain to their doctors that something's wrong. And a lot in my case was like, I feel fine now, like leave me alone. And they're doing more tests and finding more things. And so, yeah, sometimes I think we overtest and I'm not a doctor and I'm not a counselor. So I would advise anyone that needs it to seek medical attention, psychological attention. But there's a lot that I could do on my own. And so when I went to my chiropractor and she did that work that kind of opened up this space in me that was like, oh, these things are related. And it wasn't immediate, but it was like maybe 3 months. I started feeling this physical pain I had held in my body for years begin to lessen and eventually leave. That it was like, that just kept me going. And there were all of these like synchronicities happening at the same time, or serendipities, or whatever you want to call it, where I was reading and learning about journaling to heal. And I was reading about shame from Brene Brown and learning to release shame, and learning about like perfectionism and people pleasing from someone named Glennon Doyle. And eventually led me to these authors, these doctors, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk and When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. And they talk about these emotional effects on our nervous system and our long-term chronic health conditions, physical conditions like heart disease and lung disease, which I have, are very much related to our emotional response, our traumas, or our behaviors that if we suppress our emotions. So all of that just kept me going down this path of self-healing. Would be a neat and tidy thing if I could say I went to a psychologist and they helped me get rid of all of it. I didn't do that. I went to a chiropractor. I read a lot of books. I tried a lot of things. I wrote a lot down, and I found a lot of healing from that for sure.
Yeah. Well, what are some things that like gifts that you've realized from this? Maybe going through it, you didn't see, but when you look back, what are some good things?
That's a good question. I love this idea of Ryan Holiday wrote a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And I believe that my life at least is an illustration of the obstacle in the path becomes the path, right? The way I live and show up in the world today is completely different than if none of this had ever happened to me. And so I'm so grateful for that. I think the first greatest gift was just getting super clear about what I valued and trying to find a way to make that work with my life. And then I would say the second gift is a sense of awareness. So until I got in that really low place, I wasn't even aware of the mental talk that I had, the stories that I told myself, obviously not aware of the relationship between what had happened to me as a child and what was going on in my life as an adult. So that was hard work, like not physical, but it sucked. Like there's a reason I had put that off for so long. But I'm so grateful that like learning that that was the way to healing. I mean, my greatest hope is that I could just break any of those unconscious cycles for my own family and my own daughters so that they might be able to be who they're here on this planet to be, you know?
Yeah, definitely. How would you recommend breaking those unconscious cycles?
Well, that takes time, right? So anything worth it will take a while. But first step, and really the only bit of control we might have over that is awareness, like I said. So just being the noticer of what our mind is telling us, right? Not judging it, not trying to change it or suppress it, just noticing it. Part of that could be like feeling it, where you feel it in your body and allowing that to be what it is, allowing it to go through. Once you start noticing those things, whatever they are, like for me, I was so mean to myself, super judgmental, very low confidence in myself. I would beat myself up. There was a lot of shame. And so once I was able to notice those mental patterns, just be aware, then I could detach from them. So I'm not that voice in my head, right? That's what's really important. First of all, I existed before that voice just wanted to take up all the space that it could. And then I could detach from other stories or mental chatter. So like, I am not my pain. I am not my body. I am not my mom or my dad. I am not my house or my car, whatever it is for whatever individual. Just being able to detach from those things. I think those two steps, if that's all we can do, will lead us to a place that's hopefully meant for us and not like being so trapped, maybe a place of more freedom.
So if I asked you the question, who are you? Because you just said everything that you're not.
Yeah.
How would you answer that?
That's a tricky question because it's almost like a trick question, right? There was a point in my life where I would have said, I'm a mom and a wife and a teacher. But I have to know that the real me exists without this body and without any of those roles. And it sounds weird, but once I'm able to detach from those roles, I'm able to show up in a much better way for all of those people that I do have relationships with in my life. So it's hard to put words to that, but I would say I'm this soul that's here to fulfill this purpose on the planet. Part of that is my own awareness and consciousness, and hopefully to serve others in that same capacity.
Your soul having a human experience in a human body.
Yeah, right? I think so. What would you say?
I would say the same. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And one of the coaching courses I'm in right now is coaches having us look at a picture of us when we were like 5. And I have my picture on my phone. And we've just been doing that this week. Look at that being, probably before a lot, or even at age 2 or 3, look at yourself. You're still that being. He said, just like your fingerprint, that being is still you. It's still in you, that innocent being. And you wouldn't talk nasty to that little child. And you're still, in many ways, that still essence is in you. And I agree that a lot of us don't recognize all that. We know we have mental chatter in our brains. We know sometimes we talk nasty to ourselves or whatever, but when you become aware of it, it's kind of like if you had always wanted a red car and you never saw any red cars on the road. And then all of a sudden you get this red car and you see everyone has one of those. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like being aware of your mental chatter and you realize, wow, there's a lot of things that I say to myself that isn't very nice, and noticing it, but recognizing that that's not you. You're not it. You don't have to be that voice in your head.
And a lot of lies, right? That's not always true. I have to hurry up and get 8 things on this list done, or I won't blah, blah, blah. I mean, whatever it is. Sometimes, mine was like being a martyr, right? I have to do everything for everyone. And so some of mine was like that. The tricky part was once I started noticing it, thinking like, oh, I won't do that anymore. And then I would catch myself doing it and I would get all wrapped up in this shame cycle of like, how could you still be doing that? How could you still be showing up this way? And so I had to learn, and I'm still working on just noticing it and being grateful I notice it now and moving forward from there and not beating myself up because I'm still doing this.
Yeah, you're human. So you wrote a book.
Yeah, I did.
Side of Perfect, discovering the mind-body connection to healing chronic illness. So a lot of people I don't view myself as a perfectionist at all. My mom would agree. She'd come over here and say, your plate is a mess. But I do get the people pleasing that you've talked about. And so tell us about your book.
Well, first of all, the book is about all this stuff we've been talking about. Yeah. Me starting this path to healing, being shocked that I found myself in a really hopeless place and trying to find a true way to get out of that and not get back there. So for me, that took going back into my childhood and unwrapping some things that had happened. And so the book kind of takes you through that journey only because just to illustrate the point of what had happened, how I never dealt with it, and then what it created in my body systemically, eventually, not alone, but definitely contributed to it.
And how do you write about something that happened when some of the people that might have been involved are still alive?
That was the trickiest part. I have to say, first of all, when I started, I was journaling to heal and I didn't want nor think I would publish it. But part of my healing was learning to trust myself and my own intuition and take steps toward where my intuition was leading me so that I could strengthen that, right? For so long, as you talked about, people pleasing, I had done everything to be and do what I thought other people wanted me to be and do. And I didn't know who I was beyond that. And so that took a lot of just listening to the tiniest bit of curiosity or hunch and stepping toward it. And so just journaling was the first bit of that. And then it sort of became clear that this needed to be a whole thing, at least for me, right? And that was very healing. It was kind of like if I were to write a letter to my younger self. And then I just realized that to hold this commitment to myself and my personal growth, to try to spread this message to so many people that I'm hearing that like, you don't need a diagnosis to know that so many people are burned out and tired and sick and don't know what to do. So I had to hold that commitment. And it was really hard to wrap up this long explanation. The hardest part was thinking I might tell other people's stories. And so I had to do my best to tell my story without telling anyone else's. And the trickiest part of that was my parents' story is so intertwined with mine.
Yeah.
And so I did my best to do that. And they're definitely a part of the story. And I did my best to prepare them. And I just knew that the right thing was to push through it and keep going and ultimately trust that my liberation means the liberation of the other people I'm in relationship with, no matter how that plays out, right? They can react and respond any way they want. And my emotional memory may be very different from theirs. And I accept all of those things, and that's okay.
That's really hard to do for a people pleaser, what you just said. But that's really hard as a people pleaser. So you have a good relationship with your parents?
My relationship with one of my parents is better than it's ever been. And this has sort of helped that along, but there's also been some intentional work along the way. And with another, things are pretty superficial, but not angry or terrible. It's just that very superficial and when it's convenient kind of relationship. I haven't had a dramatic response negatively from anyone in my family at this point. I don't know that everyone has even read it. So that probably helps a little bit. So yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question.
But how was it on your marriage? I mean, this whole time that you were sick, right? You were married, right? It's pretty hard when you live with somebody who's got an invisible illness. You can't look at them and tell. And I mean, I know just living with my daughter in that way, and you just feel so helpless because you want to help and you want to do something and you can't.
Yeah, that's a big question. So I feel so fortunate that as I decided to grow and heal, my husband chose to hold that space for me and grow along with me, right? But
Awesome.
I've had a relationship with my husband in one way or another since we were basically children, teenagers, and we chose each other at a much different place in our life than we are now, both with a history we didn't understand or recognize and behavior patterns we also didn't understand and recognize. And so I showed up in a marriage as a perfectionist and people pleaser, and he showed up in a different way. And we had a codependency that wasn't super healthy. And when I started this, I just knew like, this is life or death for me. So I had to communicate with him, and it was sloppy and messy and ugly. This is what I have to do. And this is what I need. And he really showed up, and not always perfect. Obviously, we're imperfect and we're still working through it, but willing to grow and to change. So yeah, I would say this is like a great gift for my marriage too.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How many children do you have?
We have 2 girls.
Okay. How old are they?
15 and 10 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. One, how does one listen to their intuition?
That can be such a weighty thing. It's kind of like asking like, well, what's your purpose? Find your purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we hold that too tightly, maybe. So for me, it was just listening to the smallest bit of curiosity first and just knowing I could take one step toward it and then not beating myself up if that was wrong or it failed or didn't work or whatever. And then slowly, I think that intuition sort of grew into a bit of a louder voice. And sometimes for me, it's something that just keeps nagging me and won't let go. And I don't understand why. It seems hard, just like this book, right? Like, I don't want to do that. That seems really hard and that might hurt some other people, but that just wouldn't let go. That just kept holding on.
So I think it's important to pay attention to your discontent and to pay attention to your desires, because sometimes we have these desires or we have this discontent and we ignore it and we just keep going and keep going and keep going. But like you said, it just keeps coming back. So yeah, I think that's important. And then for me, it took slowing down because I was just somebody who was always just way too busy. I had too much to do. I was going through my checklist, hyperachiever, got to get this, 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 and this done. And then when that's done, I can relax, but then I could never relax because I'm always creating something else to do. And then I was always too busy to even notice any intuition or any curiosity.
Yeah, I agree. A part of my healing has been learning to meditate to sort of slow down my immune system in that way. At first, it was just like checking a box, right? Like, well, there's evidence that this helps people heal. But over time, I could maybe sit with myself for 2 minutes to start and then 4 minutes. And over time, I think you're right. Just learning how to slow down and sit with yourself for a while, you'll learn yourself a lot better than running through the checklist. We do those to avoid ourselves and having to listen to ourselves and our pain or what's going on, right? And so, yeah, if we can stop being busy and slow down a little bit, that definitely helps a lot.
Well, I figured when I retire, I won't be as busy, but no, I have a boss who's really demanding. That's me.
Yes.
So I had a coach. I told her I wanted to feel my feelings more. I wanted to slow down. I wanted to be more and not do, but I didn't know how to do any of it. And so she gave me these meditations to do for 40 days straight. And every 2 weeks I'd meet with her and she'd say, okay, what day are you on? Well, 1. Well, what happened? I've got a lot to do. You don't even know. I've got a lot to do. I get up and then I just start doing what I've got to do and I don't have time. And finally, she was very patient with me, but finally when I got to 40 days, I started wanting to do it and it wasn't something to check off my list. And memories that I had suppressed came back. Like I remember things and just so much happened. It really was life-changing. Yeah.
That's good. That's a good story. Yeah. Similar when I quit my job thinking like this will eliminate all my stress. I quickly created plenty of other jobs for myself, right? Started homeschooling my daughter, was on the library board, was officiating for another daughter's sport, just like I was busy and I learned the stress was in me, right? So there are definitely outside factors that contribute to it, but my response was the stress response. And then also how much validation or ego building I got from being busy. Like, I don't have time. I can't do that. That's a big piece to unwrap, right? Take that coat off and be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I choose my life. I design my day. It's up to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. So what else have I not asked that I should ask? You said here too, you live on the in the plains of southeastern Colorado with your husband, 2 daughters, the dog, Denali, and 6 chickens.
Yeah.
And when you're
And
not traveling to the mountains or the beach or Spanish-speaking countries, that's where you are in your sunroom on your back porch sipping hot tea. That's cool.
yeah, I love hot tea. We live in a quiet, slow place that should be easy to slow down and not be busy. Took me a lot of years to realize that. So it's nice. We're close to a lot of activities, but then we can be as slow as we want here too. So I think we've hit a lot of things. I think we've touched on a lot of stuff for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know this is going to help a lot of people that listen to this Onward podcast realize they're not alone. That's one of the reasons I do this. I think everybody knows, probably a lot of people know somebody who has autoimmune illnesses or invisible illnesses. And what would you say would be a good way to support somebody that's going through something like that, that's in that discovery process or just has them? Have you heard of the spoon theory?
Yeah,
Okay.
I have. Well, healing from anything takes time and a lot of grace, right? So I don't know that I could have shortcut my path. It was long. And they say like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so that's how mine went many years. And so I think whatever way you can hold space for someone that's struggling in this way, showing up in a non-judgmental, just being the noticer, the listener, just being there. I think a lot of times also, mental health things are chronic illnesses as well. And so people with my personality type, some mental health issues tend to pull back and kind of hide away. And so I would just say, don't give up on people. Keep checking in, hold space without judgment, encourage them to trust their own voice and follow what it's telling them to do.
Yeah. And I'll just explain the spoon theory since I brought it up. So I might get it a little wrong, but basically 2 girlfriends are out at dinner and one of them's asking the other one, well, what is it like to be sick like you are, to feel like you are, because you look fine? So she grabs, I don't know, let's say 12 spoons. And she says, all right, I have 12 spoons to get through the day. And basically it takes her, well, my daughter would say it's 3 spoons to take a shower. And then you've got to eat, and then you've got to go out with a friend, or especially if you're in high school, like my daughter was when this came on, go out with a friend, and then you've got your homework and you've got laundry and you've got all these things, but you only have 10 spoons for the day. And maybe that day you're feeling bad, so you only have 3 spoons, or you could use up all maybe borrow a spoon from tomorrow. So you have to really think through the decisions about what you're going to do. Like I watched my daughter do that. Like, I can't go out with this friend because I want to do this tomorrow, so I can't do this today. And sometimes she would lay on the couch. And at first I thought she's being lazy, but then as more and more I understood, she's setting boundaries and creating that ability for her to be able to expend a spoon later in the day.
Yeah, that's so good to be able to work through that. Not easy, right? That I can't imagine doing that in high school, but just learning to set those boundaries in life. But yeah, like you said, if I go on a long hike with my husband, it's going to take me days and days to recover. And so is that what I want to do? And then I make the time and space for it. And now I've learned, hopefully, to give myself some grace in that recovery period and not beat myself up for that. Perfectionists, people pleasers, perfectionism shows up in a lot of ways. So I wonder about you. It may not be your clean house, but it may be the way you think you have to get a million things done during the day.
That's true.
Yeah. It's hard to look at ourselves and know we need rest and need to slow down without judging ourselves for that too. But yeah, the Spoonies, it's a way also of just people being a part of community and supporting each other, and just that term. And on social media, it's good. It's good. It's a sisterhood, and I'm sure men are welcome too. There's just a lot of women in that community. So
yeah, definitely. Debbie, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you, Emily. It has been my pleasure completely. I appreciate you and this time and this lovely conversation. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who listens to the Onward podcast. I want to get in the habit of calling you onwarders. I call everybody that's in the onward movement onwarders. And we even have an onwarder award for people who go through the coaching program I call the Onward Accelerator Coaching Program. So onwarders, thank you for listening. And I know you're listening from all over the world because I can see the statistics on Lisbon. Let me just list the countries from where people are listening: Belgium, India, the United States, Canada, Australia, Bangladesh, Hong Kong, Nepal, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, Denmark, Germany, Russian Federation, Ireland, Japan, Mexico, the Netherlands, Taiwan, the United Arab Emirates, El Salvador, Brazil, Nigeria, Thailand, New Zealand, Zimbabwe, and France. I appreciate all of you. Please just send me an email. Let me know who you are that's listening and what you like about the Onward podcast. I'd love to hear from you. My email is emily@emilyharman, HARMAN.com. And if you have time, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I greatly appreciate all of my Onwarders, all of you who are listening to the Onward podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.